right now we'll just go through a little more of the city hall here and see some of these murals and what they mean for the Norwegian society. This fresco celebrates national unity. From the fishing nets of the west coast to the dense forests of the east, it takes you on a voyage through the collective psyche of Norway, from its simple rural beginnings into the industrial age. And this mural tells the story of Norway's darkest period, German occupation during World War II. I got to say, my uncle Tor walked me along this mural, and he looked at every little scene and narrated it as if he lived it, because he had. And to do
I think the best place in Norway to explain the Second World War is straight in front of that mural.
This mural, because I was just so moved. It was so emotional, so from my uncle's heart. Bombs fall, and the country is overwhelmed by Nazi troops. The Gestapo breaks into homes. They target Norway's culture. Underground resistant fighters plot heroic acts of sabotage. Finally, Germany is defeated. Prisoners are freed, and Norwegians can once again wave their flag. During that long occupation, the Nazis controlled Akershus fortress. Today, that same fortress houses the Norwegian Resistance Museum, which tells the story of Norway's World War II experience. Germany, with the invasion already a fait accompli, gave Norway an ultimatum to capitulate. The king said no, eventually escaping the country to command the Norwegian resistance from London. At the start of World War II, a flurry of countries, including Norway, fell to Germany. Norway spent 5 years under Nazi occupation. A Norwegian traitor named Quisling was installed as the country's leader and ruled as a Nazi puppet. To this day, his name, Quisling, means someone who betrays their country. Germany attempted to make Norway Nazi. Propaganda posters encouraged people to join the local Nazi party and enlist with the German army to fight the Soviets on the Eastern Front. With 350,000 occupying Nazi troops to feed and house, World War II was an austere time for locals. Foraging and rationing were a way of life. From the start, there was an organized resistance, and the king maintained a government in exile in London. Communication was critical. While the Germans outlawed radios, people found creative ways to stay tuned in. Clandestine radio operators hid out in mountain huts as Nazis with direction finders tracked them down. Underground newspapers spread messages from the king, boosted morale, and inspired action. A thrilling example of Norwegian resistance was the sabotage of the heavy water factory high in Norway's mountains. Heavy water was a key to Germany's plan to build an atomic bomb. A small band of Norwegians skied over 200 miles in from Sweden, managed to blow up the plant, dealing Hitler a major setback. Toward the end of the war, resistance activity crescendoed. A thriving underground industry cranked out a crude arsenal of homemade weapons. Communiques were hidden in loaves of bread, heels of shoes, and tins of Spam. A home force of 40,000 troops was outfitted by airdrops. Finally, in May of 1945, the heroic soldiers of the Norwegian resistance were greeted by a grateful public. Outside the fortress, a statue of FDR is a memorial thanking the USA for providing Norway's support and its royal family a refuge through the war. Wow, Paul, that's pretty heavy history.
Yeah,
right
it is.
There.
Yeah.
Sweden has no Nazi resistance museum, does it?
No, they don't.
Sweden stayed neutral.
Yeah, they stayed neutral throughout the war.
Denmark has a resistance museum.
Yes, they do.
It burned down. Did they rebuild it and open it? Do you remember?
As far as I know, yeah, they did reopen it. Yeah,
that's good. And of course, Oslo has one right there in Akershus Castle, which is right downtown, and you got to check it out when you're there. Paul, what was your family's experience in World War II?
So I had actually my grandfather. He's one on the photo there behind me, and he's sitting in his parade uniform. He was in the King's Guard, but this was in 1938, so it's just before the war broke out. But after he died, my grandmother let me go through a lot of his things. And on the bottom of one of his boxes, I found this little red card. And that was actually a membership card showing that he was a member of the resistance during the Second World War, which he never spoke of. He never said anything about it. He never talked much about the war at all. It was never something that, you know, came up at family reunions or you know, gatherings. And I think that's very typical for the Norwegians who went through the war, is that when the war was over, the war was over. Yeah. And they just wanted to go on with their lives and don't look back.
Is that because just by the nature of human nature, and when you're occupied by people who are much more powerful than you, some people can be heroes, but not everybody can be heroes. And you don't want a divided society in the difficult years after a war. You want to all be together. So it's better just not to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think any war, any occupation is a trauma for the population. And it hurts to talk about it. So that's why you don't talk about it. But in the long term, that's not a good idea, because there are a lot of issues, you know, that happened during the war that needs some attention, that needs to be talked about by the public.
Yeah. To this day, I imagine there's some scars from that war. I mean, all over Europe, you've got, you know, in Spain, were you with Franco or were you against Franco? In Italy, you got Mussolini. In Norway, you got the Quisling. And a lot of people probably just said, well, let's just keep our head low and not get to put in work camp, and we'll just go along with it.
Yeah, to give you an example, for example, after the war, a lot of the Norwegian women who had been with Nazi soldiers, they were not treated very fairly. They were mistreated, to say so. And it wasn't until it was 2 or 3 years ago that our prime minister went out and gave them a formal apology.
70 years after the war, finally, it was like, you're part of our community, you're part of the family. So let's just get over that. Wow.